going to be talking about how the Modern Endangered Archives Program deals with rights assessment. But before I do that, I think it might be helpful to offer a little bit of an introduction to what the Modern Endangered Archives Program is. I do see some of our grantees on the call, which is exciting. So some of you are familiar with our work. MEAP is a grant providing program. We offer grants and funding to preserve global cultural heritage materials at risk of loss. And so our funding is all directed outside the US, the UK, and the EU. So we're really looking at countries all around the world that don't have government or institutional support for cultural heritage preservation. And our funding is meant to go in two different directions. So one for early projects that are focused on organization and documentation. And then another set of projects which are focused on digitization and the creation of digital collections. MEAP is an open access program. This is, for this conversation, kind of the starting point, because what that means is that all of the materials that get created through MEAP funding must be published on the UCLA Library website. For the inventories and surveys that get created for our planning grants, our initial kind of inventory grants, those are published online, and then the digital collections are published through the UCLA Digital Library. This matters because we can only fund projects that have viability for online publication. And I'm going to come back to kind of where that fits into this question about rights assessment. So we are currently in the middle of our 8th call for applications. And in the first 7 years of funding, we have funded over 170 projects in 63 different countries. You can see a little bit of a breakdown here. And we continue to grow every year. And much like Perry just mentioned, one of the challenges of working on a global scale is that we cannot be experts on the copyright laws in each of these countries where we work. Sorry. So this is just like a quick interstitial slide to give you a sense of what does it look like once our digital collections go online. We publish all kinds of materials. So this is another kind of challenging piece around copyright. We publish and fund the digitization of photographs, of archival materials, of photo negatives, of audio materials, of video materials, kind of a broad range of contemporary archival collections, each of which have their own copyright laws in different parts of the world. So it's another kind of piece that we are navigating. So because MEP can only fund projects that can result in online publication, the rights assessment happens at the application phase. So we are not working with a grantee directly and offering support from the UCLA Library from somebody much like in Perry's position to say, okay, tell us all about your collection. We're going to help you understand all of the different rights and risks involved. We rely on the applicant to tell us what they see as the rights and risk involved in the collection. They are responsible for telling us who the copyright holder is this material in the public domain, do they believe that this material is orphaned? And often when we get an application, applicants are applying with lots of different kinds of materials. So it could be that part of the collection they want to digitize is publications that they believe are orphaned. Part of it is video cassettes that were taken by an individual, and part of it is photographs that were housed at an institution and they don't know who the photographers are. So there's like 3 really different sets of materials within this one project, 3 or potentially more very different rights to navigate. So I think I mentioned a bunch of this already, but we evaluate rights at the application phase because a big criteria for evaluation, whether or not this project is going to be funded, is the viability of online publication. So if our panel does not think this collection can be published online, we are not going to be able to fund it. So there's a lot of responsibility on the applicant to articulate what they see as the primary questions around copyright and why they think this is eligible for online publication. One of the things that was really helpful in Perry's description is that I realized we are actually working through your kind of pipeline for rights assessment in our application. So the application asks questions that kind of walk our applicants through those questions. So first, identifying the copyright holder. That's one of the questions we ask. Do you know who it is? and have you talked to them and have you gotten their permission to work with this material? Um, and then determining the copyright status. And one of the things that we ask, because there's such a range of possible projects, is can you send us any documentation? So Perry mentioned that sometimes they get a document that says like within our understanding, we transfer the rights to this institution. We would want to see that document, and then that helps us determine like, do we think this is enough? Do we not think this is enough? One of the things that happens most often is that project teams will apply to work with a broad range of material, as I mentioned, and they'll say, well, this material is orphaned because these publications are no longer in existence. And so instead of just taking their word for it, often what we'll need to see is a spreadsheet with some sort of due diligence that allows us to say like, okay, we feel comfortable publishing this under fair use because we have this due diligence to look back on and say like, this particular publication ended publication in this year. The online, article about it says that it wasn't purchased by anyone else, or the applicant reached out to the publisher's family and they no longer own the copyright. So there's a kind of range of possibilities that applicants might track down the copyright. We also, the other way that we assess at the application phase is by, we have a copyright permission agreement form available online. It's available in multiple languages. One of our kind of key beliefs is that anybody who is providing consent for digitization and online publication should know what they're consenting to. And so we will translate this document into any language that an applicant requests. And so that is part of our process. And it's really key that we are not asking for copyright transfer. So we are not asking anybody who owns the copyright of their material to give that copyright to MEAP or to the UCLA library. Instead, we are asking for permission for the teams for having permission to digitize, for permission to publish, and then for permission to steward those digital copies for the long term. I already mentioned it. The other kind of piece that we assess at the application phase is the ethical and kind of community consent. So beyond copyright, we're also interested in, does the community that's represented in this collection, do they know that this material is being digitized? Do they know that it will be available online for global access? And there's no kind of clear legal framework for us to say, go look at your, local laws around copyright. This is really something that we want to see applicants are connecting with members of the community that are reflected in the collection and figuring out how to assess what does privacy look like? What kind of content can be shared online? What kind of content can't be shared online? And it's part of our assessment at the application phase that our panel wants to see that any application to MEAP, any project funded by MEAP, has a built-in process for assessing community consent. The last slide is a little bit of a jump, but I just wanted to highlight that if a project is funded, it's digitized, it gets published in the UCLA online digital catalog or digital library. The copyright materials are published online at the object level. So for example, this collection, the Willis Bell photography collection from Ghana, the material remains copyrighted, but the trust that owns the Willis Bell photography collection, the archive, they gave UCLA permission to publish this material. And the information, so if you wanted to work with this material in an academic book or in a documentary, you would reach out to this kind of unit, right, the Willis Bell archive, and that information is included in the publication online. That is what I have to share.